Hello and welcome to the 11th episode of Wahl on Law. My name is Jonas Wahl, and I am a pre-law student at the University of Delaware. On this podcast, we cover what's happening across the country in law and policy and how it affects your daily life. Today, we're joined by a special guest, Professor Daniel Green, who specializes in international relations and U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, to break down one of the most divisive topics in the world: the conflict between Israel and Palestine. Professor, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
So, before we get started, I want to say that we will not be advocating for or against Israel or Palestine. The point of today's episode is to inform our listeners of what is happening in this region. With that in mind, let's get right into it. First, just to ground our listeners, who are the Israelis?
Well, the Israelis are Jews and Arabs who live in the country of Israel. The country of Israel was born in 1948 after the colonization by Britain of Palestine was over. Israelis are about Jewish Israelis are about 75% of the population. And then, Israel got its independence in 1948 and has been a country ever since then.
And on the other side, who are the Palestinians?
Well, the process of Israel, there was a plan in 1947 to partition the country. Basically, waves of Jews settled in Palestine after the 1880s, when it was a province of the Ottoman Empire. And then in 1917, Britain took over a lot of that region, including what is today Israel and Palestine and Jordan and Iraq and Saudi, some parts of Saudi Arabia. And so now the Palestinians are the people. Some 25% or 23% of Israel is Arab Palestinians, Arab Israelis, and then there's a lot of people who live in the West Bank, in Gaza, another like 7 million or so, and then the Palestinian refugee diaspora outside. So it's another about 8-10 million people. I actually don't know the precise figure of number of people who call themselves Palestinians.
Got it. And I want to define one more thing for our listeners. Gaza and Hamas. How do they fit into this situation?
Well, Gaza is a small enclave in the southwestern corner along the Mediterranean coast. It's about 25% larger than the island of Manhattan. It's a small place. It has about 2 million Palestinians living there. They had elections there in 2006, and Hamas took over. Hamas is hardline Palestinian resistance movement, pretty powerful, that made Gaza its home base, basically. There's some Hamas in the West Bank as well, but for the most part, Gaza, after the 2006 elections, Gaza became kind of a Hamas statelet, a little unit state, and that's where. And then from there, resisted off and on Israeli presence and Israeli. Well, it wasn't really Israeli occupation because they didn't occupy Gaza. They put a cordon around Gaza, a kind of isolated Gaza. And then, the famous attacks of October 2023, and that kind of rips open the whole issue of what to do about Gaza.
Definitely. And so like how you said, like Hamas kind of operates in two ways. It's like a governing authority in Gaza, and it's also like an armed group that carries out attacks mainly against Israel. And it has been designated as a terrorist organization by the United States as well as the European Union and a few other countries. So that is another aspect. It's not the friendliest group in the world.
Very true.
And now the big question that I'm sure everybody is here to listen. What are the Israelis and Palestinians fighting about?
Well,
Yeah, if you want to break it down in however way you think would be easiest.
in 100 words or less. In a sense, one way to view it is that they're fighting over the land of Palestine / Israel. They're fighting over that territory. But I think one way to think about that conflict is to realize that on both sides, there are people that absolutely want peace and want to live together and want, a two-state solution, the classic two-state solution. And on both sides, there are hardliners who don't want peace, don't want a two-state solution, and want to basically control the entire territory. And in a sense, both sides are captive, held captive. Hardliners can really destroy peace processes. They can keep, stability from breaking out. They have successfully prevented a two-state solution. And so, yeah, in a sense, Hamas is one of the hardline groups on the Palestinian side. I would say the settler movement, the far right of Israel, is a hardliner group on the Israeli side, and they both have kind of maximalist demands for all of the territory, and basically, you know, somehow removal or getting rid of the other party. And the extremists, in a sense, have been able to prevent a resolution of that, you know, creating a two-state solution and peace, basically, pretty successfully since even before 1947, basically.
And I know you mentioned that Israel became a state in 1948. Has Palestine formally been designated as a state?
No, I mean it was three provinces of the Ottoman Empire. Then Britain took it over in 1917, 1918 during World War One, and it was the British colony of Palestine. But famously, in 1917, the British uh, Foreign Minister Arthur Balfour made an announcement, basically a paragraph, the Balfour Declaration, that Palestine, the British colony of Palestine, could also be a place for the settlement of Jews leaving Europe at the time. This wasn't World War II, this was World War I, but there was already a kind of interest on the part of some of the Allies. Germany had actually thought of doing that as well. To kind of win Jewish hearts and minds in politics of World War I in Europe, in Russia, and in the U.S. Making Palestine a place of settlement for Jews was a popular idea. The British did it in 1917, and then what had already been a kind of trickle of Jewish people in before 1917 expanded some more after the war. And so I don't think that Palestine was never independent as Palestine. It was an Ottoman set of provinces. Then it was a British colony. And then the UN had a big partition plan to basically create a Jewish and Palestinian state of sorts, about 55% Jewish and 45% Palestinian territory. But that was rejected. And so there was a war to create Israel. And then Israel was born from a war in 1948. So I don't, Palestine as a independent province has not existed.
So is it fair to say that the real crux of this matter is that it's a territorial dispute?
Yeah, I mean, I should say that when I say a two-state solution hasn't been arrived at, you're right that for some countries around the world and some people around the world, there is recognition of Palestine. And it does have, I think, an observer status at the United Nations. So it does kind of have some quasi recognition, but that is very complicated, international politics of that recognition because, as you say, there isn't a single government of Palestine. A lot of countries don't recognize it. And most people would say that there has not been a two-state solution. But yeah, it's a fight over territory.
So in order to uh, explain for our listeners, when you look at this from like a legal perspective, how does international law address the question of who has a legitimate claim to land?
So there are various UN Security Council decrees and declarations, for example. There is international law that um, is being violated. I mean, there was kind of an understanding after World War II that you could not conquer territory and keep it. that, in a sense, sovereignty was going to be determined by regular means. You could absorb a piece of territory if there was a plebiscite and the people voted to join you, for example. But Israel is one of the few, and perhaps Russia right now as well, one of the few countries that is growing in size because they're conquering territory. They have annexed the Golan Heights. They've annexed parts of the West Bank. Israel has. There are settler movements trying to take more of the West Bank. So I don't know for sure, but I think most of that activity is illegal. Israel, if it annexes Gaza or parts of Gaza or more of the West Bank, that is against international law. That's not supposed to be happening.
So you mentioned the United States. What role does the United States play in this conflict between Israel and Palestine?
Well, a very important role. The U.S. is a good friend of Israel. Both Democrat and Republican governments tend to be a good friend of Israel. Israel is an important ally in the Middle East, and at times, someone that we really have some presidents view it as a very close special relationship, like the special relationship that we have with Britain or something. So it is a fellow democracy, which means a lot in American politics. We tend to like to support other democracies and help them out. Um, there is an argument if you are kind of, anti-Israel, anti-Israeli expansion, then you view the U.S. as too much of a sponsor of Israel, too helpful to Israel. Some people argue that, Israel has been able to become a superpower in the Middle East because of American help and support. And if you're upset at that, then you're angry at the U.S. There is an argument that I agree with that it's useful to have the U.S. close to Israel, because if you want Israel to do something, you can convince the U.S. and then the U.S. will convince Israel. That has been a kind of crucial role that the U.S. has played at times as kind of like a broker. Rashid Khalidi says that the U.S. acts as, Israel's lawyer and is too much of an advocate for Israel. But at times, at crucial times, the U.S. has been able to put a lot of pressure on Israel, particularly Israeli politicians, to do more to try and get a two-state solution or things like that. So at times, it's been argued that the close relationship between Israel and the U.S. is a benefit to everyone to try and get the U.S. to be a broker of a lasting peace.
The U.S. plays a dual role here. It is Israel's strongest ally, while also kind of trying to, at least in theory, act as a broker for peace in the region. Um, so why should someone in the United States care about the situation? It's thousands of miles away.
Well, I mean, there have been arguments that we shouldn't care, but we're good friends with Israel. Israel is a close friend. Um, the classic argument that people make is oil and the importance of oil in modern economics, and the lessons of, for example, the 1970s when oil taps were turned off and the global economy crashed in the 1970s, and the U.S. suffered a lot from that. So oil, but there's also an argument that the world should be weaning itself off of oil. The U.S. doesn't directly rely on oil for its consumption from the Middle East, but because American oil is marketed internationally, when the international price goes up, it also goes up in the U.S. That's what's happening right now. So thirdly, I would say it's a super strategic region. It is a violent region. It's a region that is a kind of playground of superpowers in some ways. We also have, Turkey is an important NATO ally. We have been involved in places like Iraq, and Iraq is still, somewhat of a client state of the U.S. So we have a lot of close relations with some of those countries. They are crucial to keeping the global economy going. And we have the very, very close relationship with Israel. So there's a lot of reasons, even though it's far away. Many presidents have gotten elected. Well, we're not going to do regime change. We're not going to do nation building. We're not going to engage in forever wars. We're not going to, we're going to kind of retreat. but it doesn't stick. We keep being drawn back to the Middle East because of all the reasons that it's vital.
Definitely. And this conflict, like as you said, it affects us all with like oil prices, rising gas, also taxes. We are the ones funding this war effectively, as the U.S. does provide billions of dollars in aid to Israel. Whether you agree with it or not, that's what's happening right now. So it makes sense for us to be interested in it because our taxes depend on the result of this war. So I really think that it is really important for us to care, as you said.
Well,
So
yeah, I
I have
mean,
so
go ahead.
no, no, please go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, it's estimated that the current war over Iran and the Gulf is costing about $1 billion a day. So yeah, we pay for it every day.
Definitely. Um, that was a great answer. And I want to get into one more topic here, the term genocide. So I have the legal definition of the term genocide here. So according to the United Nations Genocide Convention in 1948, definition is acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. So, based off that legal definition, how would experts determine if what's going on in Israel is a genocide?
Or you mean like what's going on in Gaza or what was going on in Gaza?
Yes, exactly.
Well, that is also a tough question. There are policies, there are things that you can do that added up, give the appearance of attempting genocide. Um, Denying food, killing a lot of one group of people, denying them food and assistance, blowing up their hospitals. There are genocide charges, for example, against Vladimir Putin over Russia, because Russia, for example, has attacked hospitals in Ukraine, has blown up Ukrainian museums and opera houses and things like that. When you're trying to wipe out the culture of another people, that is part of genocide. Russia has taken Ukrainian children and kind of force adopted them to Russian families. That is also a part of genocide. When you're kind of trying to wipe out the existence of another people, and it's in a sense it's the attempt to do that, right? And so genocide doesn't mean you successfully killed all 2 million Gazans. It means that what you're doing seems to be on the path to possibly killing a lot of them. And so there is an argument that, the heavy bombing, the mass death in Gaza could be considered genocide or an attempt at genocide of the Gazans in Palestine, Palestinian Gazans. I mean, that is an argument that has been made, definitely.
And I do want to state that there has been some ceasefires that have been implemented throughout various regimes. I know that President Donald Trump had a temporary ceasefire, I think, for a few days, but all these ceasefires usually end up not lasting long. So, looking ahead, is there a path towards peace for Israel and Palestine?
Yeah, I mean, you can always imagine one. I should say, right now the war is over Iran, and basically Israel and the U.S. would like regime change in Iran. But um, the Palestinian-Israeli fight, I don't know. It's hard to be really optimistic. I think that the chances for a real two-state solution were like 15 to 20 years ago. Um, there is much less interest. Most Israelis, I think the majority now of Israelis are not in favor of a two-state solution. I think they've kind of given up on, Palestinian statehood. It's certainly not the Netanyahu government. It's not the Israeli right. Political parties are not interested in a two-state solution. And the Palestinians at least want a two-state solution. I mean, Hamas wants a one-state solution in which they basically control the entire territory. The Hamas has said that Israelis that were there before 1917 could stay, but Hamas says that Israel should be basically ethnically cleansed of a lot of Jews, and and the Palestinian diaspora and refugees can come back and make it Palestine. And some Jews would be allowed to live there, but it should be a Palestinian Muslim place. Um, So on the extreme sides, there's no stomach for peace. The problem is that the kind of the hardliner position has gotten bigger on both sides, right? There's more Palestinians that are angry and frustrated. And there's more Israelis that are angry and frustrated, and they're just not in a mood. That said, I thought that maybe like ceasefire in Gaza, you know, maybe if there's elections coming up in Israel, and it's not likely that the Netanyahu government will last, and so there might be more moderate government that comes in Israel. So yeah, I think we have to hope for a two-state solution and a lasting peace, but it's those hopes have been dashed many times over the last decades. So I don't know. It's not really an optimistic picture right now. And I just fear that Palestinians will be frustrated again and again and again, and there's not going to be a happy ending to this. It's just going to continue with violence and confrontation, and the gradual expansion of Israel, and the I don't know, somehow the movement to transfer the elimination of the Palestinian population from those territories. It's sad.
Definitely. So it's like you said, a peaceful resolution could still be possible, but it would be a long-term goal, not anything that would happen anytime soon.
Well, I mean, there's supposedly, I don't know exactly when Israeli elections are. They're saying like October, but I don't know. Yeah, there has to be. There's an old argument that you need a perfect storm, the perfect storm theory of peace, which is that there has to be a willing leader of the Palestinians, a willing leader of the Israelis, and a willing leader in the American presidency to create it. And that has rarely happened. That there's all three positions have been occupied by people that want a two-state solution, that the U.S. will force it to happen because the U.S. is going to have to use some pressure and use some money to make it happen. Donald Trump has talked about like billions of dollars coming in to help, build up Palestine and stuff like that, trying to buy a two-state solution. Do you really need a perfect storm of leaders in the three bodies? And that doesn't happen very often, but it could happen, I guess any time.
Definitely. And it's like you said, this situation can't be reduced to like a good versus bad narrative. So if listeners take one thing away from this conversation, what should it be?
I think what I would hope is that we want a Middle East without violence, right? And a big part of that is some justice for the Palestinians that the Palestinians will accept. And so you really want to hope that somehow there is a two-state solution possible. People can be convinced. There's been arguments that, well, people in Israel might rally around a two-state solution depending on the details. If there was a case put forward, if there was a plan, and some Israeli politicians are putting forward plans for a two-state solution. You just, like I said, you should hope for a perfect storm that will create the conditions for a two-state solution, because a lot of the other violence in the region is in kind of the name of supporting the Palestinian cause, like Hezbollah in Lebanon attacking Israel from the north. Well, they're in support of Iran, but Iran supports Hamas and the Palestinians in the support of the Palestinian cause. So if you can solve the Palestinian cause and give them a decent sized state where they can live in peace like, normal people, and not under siege, in a sense, not surrounded by fences and checkpoints, then you can solve a lot of other problems in the Middle East as well. So hope for a two-state solution somehow.
And that concludes the questions I have for you today. Thank you, Professor Green, for joining me today and breaking down the Israel-Palestine conflict. It was a great conversation, and I really appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me.
If you liked this episode, make sure to follow or subscribe to Wahl on Law so you don't miss any future episodes. You can also sign up for our email list at wahlonlaw.com to get notified whenever a new episode drops. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Wahl on Law.